The global power struggle is generating new tensions between China and the United States. How does it impact countries worldwide, shaping policy choices and economic fortunes? In what ways does Africa play a significant role in the unfolding rivalry between the U.S. and China? The economic and geopolitical crossfire between China and the U.S. has far-reaching implications that extend beyond their bilateral relationship. These implications impact the economic fortunes and policy decisions of nations worldwide. In this episode, our focus turns to Africa, a continent playing a significant role in this unfolding rivalry. The following list of 10 gives facts about China's involvement in Africa, how it affects American interests, and what Africans expect from American foreign policy. Number 1. The long-awaited U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit has finally arrived, and its arrival is met with a warm welcome. Since 2000, China has hosted the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, which is largely regarded as a crucial tool for furthering Chinese diplomatic and commercial objectives. Summits in Africa are also held in other countries, such as Russia, Turkey, and Japan. This is only the second summit on Africa that the U.S. has hosted. The first was in 2014. There is reason to believe that this summit will have an impact, despite the fact that it sometimes gets criticized for failing to yield tangible outcomes. The deal rooms of its business forum, for instance, will announce business deals involving American and African firms, some of which are supported by American government organizations. Since nearly every invited leader is likely to participate, the summit is a significant indication of the priority the United States places on its connections with Africa. African leaders have responded favorably to the invitation. Number 2. For more than 20 years, China has steadily extended its presence in Africa. Beijing's assistance to liberation organizations battling colonial rule marked the beginning of China's involvement in Africa. China's business engagement increased starting in the late 1990s and was formalized in 2013 with the Belt and Road Initiative, a well-funded initiative to increase political influence and trade ties throughout the developing globe. Lending for infrastructure development designed and built by Chinese corporations, as well as resource extraction by Chinese mining and energy companies, are important operations. China has increased its footprint in almost all of Africa, with some priority countries being Ethiopia, Angola, and Zambia. Chinese influence in Africa has grown dramatically since the end of the Cold War, while U.S. influence has stagnated. Number 3. China now dominates the African economy by a wide margin over the United States. China has emerged as Africa's most significant economic partner, surpassing U.S.-Africa trade by a fourfold ratio and reaching a staggering $254 billion in 2021. The main source of foreign direct investment, which sustains hundreds of thousands of jobs in Africa, is China. This amount is approximately twice the magnitude of American foreign direct investment in Africa. Despite a recent decline in financing for African nations, China continues to be by far the continent's greatest lender. Being the second largest economy in the world, China's commercial activity in Africa was only to be expected to develop along with it. This is especially true given China's need for raw resources to feed its enormous manufacturing base. However, this expansion also reflects a determined attempt on the part of the Chinese government to make considerable strides in Africa. Number 4. Not all Chinese activities in Africa are concerning. U.S. authorities are concerned about China's military activity in Africa, particularly in Equatorial Guinea. China built its first military outpost in Djibouti in 2017, and the Pentagon fears Beijing may use its financial influence to purchase a port. China's military ports in the Atlantic Ocean differ significantly from other African infrastructure projects. The U.S. should focus on critical actions like telecommunications and strategic minerals, as China will continue to participate in Africa. This statement is counterproductive and fails to impress Africans who desire increased commerce and investment. Number 5. Uncertainty surrounds China's part in resolving disputes. China has mostly stood on the sidelines when it comes to diplomatic dispute settlement in Africa, despite its expanding business footprint. Although Beijing did name a special envoy for the Horn of Africa earlier this year and host a peace conference there, Given its significant economic and political ties to Ethiopia, one might have expected China to be more involved in diplomatic efforts to end the catastrophic civil conflict there. Washington should be ready in case China departs from its usual non-interference policy and takes on a more prominent diplomatic role in African disputes, even though the African Union has taken the diplomatic initiative and the United States has played both a public and behind-the-scenes role in Ethiopia. Number 6. To prevent negative repercussions from a big power rivalry, the majority of African nations seek positive relations with both China and the United States. African leaders are cautious about great power competition because they remember the Cold War, when the US and the Soviet Union conducted proxy wars in Africa. China is seen as a successful development model by certain Africans. Chinese diplomacy actively promotes this positive image throughout Africa. When pressing African nations to vote in favor of denouncing Russia's blatant invasion of Ukraine at the UN, China abstained. The United States was acting in the interests of the continent. But generally speaking, US diplomacy in Africa will be more successful when it is not presented as an us or them choice, especially when facing off against China. Early in the Biden presidency, Secretary of State Antony Blinken informed allies that Washington would not anticipate them picking between Beijing and Washington. But if the two big nations' ties deteriorate, pressure on this strategy will grow. Number 7. Africans desire increased trade with the United States. Increased trade and investment are necessary for Africa, the world's poorest and fastest-growing continent, to avoid escalating unemployment and social unrest. African leaders are aware of the value of the American market and American corporate norms, despite their country's economic marginalization in the world. Since American corporations have been reluctant to join owing to perceived dangers, infrastructure, and government backing, the African Diplomatic Corps has requested trade at the Biden administration summit. Number 8. While competing with China, the United States should leverage its advantages. Although some U.S. businesses are competitive in the fields of health, financial technology, and renewable energy, others are up against Chinese businesses in sectors like the building of roads and bridges. Strong African immigrant communities live in the United States, and the summit successfully interacts and highlights these communities. While China opposes these ideals, Washington should back African democratic groups, the media, and civil society in their fight for transparent and inclusive administration. Number 9. A transparent contract is essential. Africans and Americans have a desire to see more open economic practices across the continent. Abuse, fraud, and waste take place away from public view. Africans are advocating for more openness in their government's commercial ties in a number of different countries. The largest infrastructure project in their nation's history, the now completed Mombasa-Nairobi Railway, was financed with a $5 billion loan from the Export-Import Bank of China. This was successfully pushed for by parliamentarians and civil society in Kenya. This disclosure nullified a secrecy clause, the application of which is increasingly customary for Chinese lending in Africa, raising serious concerns about responsibility. It is impossible for Africans to assess whether infrastructure projects are positively influencing their development without a general awareness of project funding terms. American companies will perform better in African markets that are more open. Number 10. In diplomacy, there are no shortcuts. A 3-day meeting with 50 nations to organize takes time and has lost opportunities. A persistent follow-up and more aggressive diplomatic engagement are required to make the most of the Biden administration's summit effort. Biden has not yet visited Africa, although officials from China and other nations frequently visit the continent. Personal visits are seen as a sign of respect by African leaders. Apart from its rivalry with China, the U.S. has many interests in Africa. China and the USA's competition for influence in Africa reflects a broader geopolitical chess match playing out on the continent. Their contrasting approaches to economic engagement, diplomatic relations, infrastructure development, security cooperation, and natural resource extraction shape Africa's political and economic landscape. African nations navigate this complex terrain, seeking to leverage opportunities while addressing potential challenges. Understanding China and the USA's influence in Africa is crucial for comprehending the evolving dynamics and implications for African countries' sovereignty, development, and future partnerships.